Welcome to It's a Customer's World, where we explore the ever-changing landscape of business, leadership, and innovation through the lens of customer centricity. In this episode, I'm doing something very different. I've asked Professor Molly Rapert to join me as a co-host to interview today's special guest. Molly's a 30-year friend, extraordinary professor of marketing at the University of Arkansas Sam M. Walton's College of Business, and goes the extra mile in connecting industry with academia. Welcome, Molly.
Thank you so much, Andy. I've been a long time fan of you, of the podcast. I use all of your content and thought leadership in my class. So for me to be invited to come talk with you and talk with Rishad, big fan of your work, and I'm delighted to be here.
Well, we're going to have a lot of fun. And since you're a teacher by training, you get to do the heavy lifting with Rishad. And Rishad needs to have some tough questions put to him because sometimes these podcasts are a bit too easy. So who better than Professor Molly? And as you've heard, today we have the privilege of welcoming back to the show our second time, a true industry visionary, Rishad Tobaccowalla. Rishad is a globally recognized strategist, advisor, and author known for his deep insights at the intersection of business, technology, and human behavior. With a career spanning over 4 decades, he played a pivotal role in shaping the digital transformation of the advertising and media industries as a senior executive at Publicis Groupe, where he served as chief growth officer and held leadership roles across the company's most influential brands. Beyond his corporate career, Rishad is a sought-after speaker, thought leader, and the author of the widely acclaimed Restoring the Soul of Business, Staying Human in the Age of Data. His latest book, Rethinking Work, Attitude, Action, and Adaptability, challenges conventional wisdom about careers, leadership, and the future of work, offering a compelling roadmap for living in an era of rapid change. We're thrilled to dive into this conversation with Rishad and explore his unique perspectives on how we can all rethink the way we work and lead. Rishad, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Great being here and also facing my interrogator, Molly.
I think it's safe to say that one thing I've never been referred to as is an interrogator. But
Yes.
I am a curator, and how lucky for me to curate content between the two of you this morning.
Fantastic.
Well,
Well, thank you.
it's going to be a fun show. And, since the show is called It's a Customer's World podcast, I'd like to kick it off with the first question. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, Rishad. If you were visiting with the CEO of a company and they told you they were a customer-centric organization, what would you expect to see?
If they were a customer-centric organization, I would expect to see the following things. One is that all the senior members of the team spend at least 10% of their time listening to and focusing on their customer, including potentially manning helplines, etc. So that's the first thing I'd basically look at. Because often most senior management is far removed from customers, or they see analysis and surveys without actually interfacing with human flesh and blood people. That's number one. Number two is I would expect them to invest deeply in the happiness and training of their employees because there is no company, there is only employees. Your customers actually interact with your employees. And if your employees are happy and they are not only productive, but they keep your customers satisfied. So if you look at something like a Starbucks, the issue is not quality of the stores. It's not basically technology. It's their baristas have turned to be very unhappy.
Wow, well said. That is probably the best answer I've heard for customer centricity and what it means. I love that. I'm going to turn it over the bulk of the heavy lifting to Molly because she uses your materials in her classes and has thoughtfully walked through how do you connect what you write and talk about to a student perspective and how she can look at it with students and prepare them as they go into the workforce. So Molly, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. And Rashad, I'll say I have copious notes and ideas of questions to ask you. Not
If
to
it,
worry, Andy's given me a time limit.
okay.
But when I read your book for the first time, I read it in terms of how it impacts me. I'm towards the end of my career. I've loved my career and I've had a lot of flexibility. So it's interesting to read this perspective. I went back and read it a second time and thought, how do my students use this information? What can I take? And what I'm most excited about this morning is getting some actionable recommendations for you on how I can help my graduating seniors navigate this space. But I'd like to
Yes.
start with a few general questions first, if that's
Sure.
okay. You have a constant theme of the undergoing transformation that we live in today. What do you think is the most important mindset shift that leaders need to make to stay relevant in this world?
As leaders, I think all leaders need to be aware of three things. And if they are, they're likely to continue to do very well. The first is to make sure that they recognize we have entered an age of debossification. And there is a big difference between a leader and a boss. And every leader has some boss like tendencies, and it is important to have boss like tendencies. But what is the difference? A boss tends to focus on zone of control, a leader tends to focus on zone of influence. A boss thinks about classical structures, which is there the conductor and everybody plays. A leader thinks in jazz like structures, it's improvisation, and how do you make sure that people improvise with each other? A boss spends a majority of their time monitoring, delegating, measuring, and checking in. A leader spends a majority of their time making, selling, guiding, and mentoring. That's number one. So, the age of debossification. The second thing that I think is extremely important is for most people to recognize that the half life of knowledge is shrinking, and we're entering in a world where knowledge is going to increasingly be free. So, to a great extent, experience will matter less, expertise will matter more. And to make sure that they continue to have expertise. I'm not saying experience will not matter. Experience provides you with some sort of crystallized intelligence, but expertise will matter more. And in many cases, this expertise might be different than the expertise that they had. The third is the world of new technology provides three very big advantages to companies. One is increased efficiency, which everybody should implement. The other is greater effectiveness. But the third one, which people don't spend enough time on, is what I basically call existential opportunity and risk. So if you use modern technology as a leader to make yourself more efficient and effective and not think about how the technology might change your business model, you might end up doing silly things. The New York Times did not. The New York Times understood that digital technology was not just about making their printing presses work faster or new algorithms for their trucks to deliver newspapers. They began to realize it meant there would be no need for newspapers or trucks in the future.
You know, I want to stay fairly true to the book because there's so many things to glean from that, but I
Yeah,
really would like to jump in on that last one. I
sure.
listened to an interview with you where you talked about the efficiencies that you personally gain from technology. You referenced the
Right.
$100 a month spend
Yeah.
and how
Yeah.
far that stretches you. I was just wondering what's your current favorite tool and how do you take the time in your busy world to continue self-training and learning about all of these opportunities that are out there? It's a bit overwhelming for my seniors and even for myself at my stage.
It is a bit overwhelming, but here are a few things to think about. In fact, your seniors are better suited for this than maybe you and I. So I believe that you never graduate from school. You just graduate from having to pay tuition. That's it. Okay. And often, obviously, because you have debt, you keep paying tuition after you graduate. But with that being said, uh, the reality of it is the day you stop learning today is the day you start becoming irrelevant. So what you want to basically do is you want to allocate an hour a day to learn. Now, when you've been in school and you've been spending a few hours a day to learn, going from a few hours a day to 1 hour is easier than if you're a manager or a leader who spends no time because you're too busy running stuff to actually allocate an hour a day to learn. So the thing I always did in my career, even when I was working on a full-time job, is I spent an hour a day to learn. And what do you learn about is anything that interests you. And so today, uh, I spend time in three broad areas. So I spend a little bit more than an hour a day because A, I have more time, or B, maybe I become dumber over time, but I need some more time. But what basically happens is I do the three broad areas. One, not surprisingly, is I'm playing around with whatever are the latest AI tools. So what I have done is I've invested, and I'm not suggesting people have to spend this scale of money, which is I spent about $160 subscribing to different AI services. Many of them you can get for free, but I want to know what state of the art is. So I use things like Claude from Anthropic, ChatGPT from OpenAI, Gemini, Midjourney, things like that, Firefly from Adobe. And I just play around. So, but in addition to playing around, I recommend to everybody to read a blog called One Useful Thing by a professor at Wharton called Ethan Mollick, One Useful Thing. And I read his stuff to also keep updated on what's going on. So I play around and I read some stuff about AI. The second thing is the second area that I spend a lot of time as a learning interface is podcasts. Because in effect, what tends to happen is the one of the best universities in the world is YouTube. The other great university is podcasts. And now for some reason people are videotaping podcasts and putting it on YouTube, but it's the same thing, right? But what tends, and some cases they show stuff and sometimes they don't. But podcast means you can have the world's greatest mentors on any subject, usually for free, or maybe you see some ads or have to see some ads or watch or listen to some ads. So that's the second area. Third is I'm very old school, which is some of the ways I process stuff happens to basically, besides doing and listening, watching, is reading. So my interface of choice still is reading, and that reading is Substack newsletters and books. And what happens is it can be a variation of different things. So, for instance, I'll give you, and it's going to be random, right? So, I'll give you an idea. I The other day I saw somebody saying, "Hey, there's this amazing article on Apple." So I went and read this article by a gentleman called John Gruber, who writes a thing called Daring Fireball, and it's his most recent article who says there's something rotten in the state of Cupertino. Okay, something like that, where actually, and he builds this analysis why Apple is now really in trouble because they really don't know how to make AI work, and they've now been showing fake AI even in their ads. It doesn't actually work. And up to now, whenever Apple showed you things, it actually was ready to ship or it worked, right? So there's something really, really wrong. And so I read that, but then I noticed that he was in conversation with someone else. He and a person I follow called Ben Thompson on Strategy have a thing called dithering, which is like a thing. So then I'm spending an hour listening to everything that they're saying on this topic. So it can sometimes be just random. I love television. So I followed for a long time. My favorite television show when it was called Better Call Saul. Better Call Saul had a accompanying podcast where the actual people who make Better Call Saul would talk about how they made it, not about what went on in the show. Like most podcasts, this happened, that happened. But they said, okay, on this episode, let's talk about the music. And they have the musical people coming in and talking about that. Yeah, on this one, let's talk about set design, right? So I got to appreciate how a work of art is made while enjoying a work of art. So this is not just about like, oh, it's school kind of thing. The idea is to learn more and to be curious and see how other people are being creative, and that will help your cognition.
I'm so excited about this answer and a little embarrassed to admit that I've already printed out your 6 C's: the
Right.
cognition, creativity, curiosity, communication, collaboration, and convincing. And they
Yes.
are literally on my office wall. And I want you to know you've changed the world for my students next semester, because in my earlier career, I focused on tactics. I'm much
Yep.
more concerned now with how I'm stealing your word. I'll give you credit, but
Good.
how I'm going to future proof their
Yes.
work. And those
Yes.
6 C's, focusing on what you just talked about, creativity and curiosity, I think are going to be the key to my students' success. So
Absolutely.
we may not talk
Exactly.
to each other in future semesters, but you will have a presence in my class from here until I retire.
Well. Thank you, Molly. And what happened is, when Andy reached out, connected me with you, and we're doing this. Simultaneously, just so happened that three other university or academics reached out to me. One is Syracuse University. One is the Medill School of Communications here at Northwestern in Chicago, um, and one is the people in the University of Arizona. And they all basically said, your book can help us prepare our students. So I visited Syracuse University, and I'm actually going to do an entire day with the Medill School in July during Alumni Week, interestingly for their alumni. Because in addition to the student part, as you rightly said, you could read this book from your perspective, right? Uh, and so the whole idea, to a great extent, is the reason I think it's very important for people who I call seasoned. That's what I call you and myself. I don't call us old. I don't call us aged. I just call us seasoned. Okay. So I call it the age of the season. Is in effect, we're likely to have 50-year careers. So even when you're like finished a 35-year career, you've got another 15 ahead of you. It might be a different type of career like I have these days versus what I was doing the first 37 years of my life in at Publicis. But part of it is this constant lifelong learning, and that's why the cognition, creativity, and curiosity comes to mind. And then the other three C's, for those who've not in your class and who have not read my book, are basically collaboration, convincing, and communication. Because the first three are what you have to do, but we don't work by ourselves. We'll work with other human beings or alien life forms called AI, so we have to collaborate with them. We have to convince, which is when everybody else has the same data. To make a case, we're going to have to learn how to story tell and convince people. And finally, communication, which is, it's going to be very important to know how to write well and how to speak well. Because if you're very moderate, then the machine talk can be as good as your talk and you're not needed.
Which brings me up to one of my favorite quotes that you have, where you talk about machines just are producing mediocre, and
Yep.
that there's really going to still be room for my students who I love to excel, but they have to take ownership of not being mediocre.
Yeah, and the three thoughts here. The first is, for what I let everybody know, is technology is the slingshot that allows David to bring down Goliath, okay, or Daniel to bring down Goliath. And every time there's an advance in technology, it actually places a superior premium on talent. And what I explain to people is this: is Hemingway is an amazing writer, and I'm trying to be a writer, but I'm like maybe 1/3 or 20% of Hemingway's capabilities. Because I have Substack, I now reach people faster and more often than a Hemingway might do. But if Hemingway had Substack, he would not just be 3 times better than me, he might be 9 times better than me. Because what tends to basically happen is technology is like a lever. And if you're really good at something, it allows you to scale it in amazing ways. But you have to be good at something. If you're just moderate, it doesn't do much, right? So the whole idea is to find a, a thing that you're not only passionate about, but you can hone a skill, a craft, and expertise, and use technology to do it. Now, I do believe the future is about AI and HI, where AI is, whether we call it artificial intelligence, augment intelligence, or alien intelligence, plus HI, which is not just human intelligence, but it's human insight, human intuition, human imagination. So there's a whole role of it, but it's but you have to leverage the technology. Just like I say, hey, listen, the the advent of Adobe Photoshop did not put illustrators out of business. It just made the best illustrators more interesting, right? And I've always basically believed that if you look at history, technology has not actually replaced jobs. It has created new opportunities and has created new types of jobs. But what happens to happen is you have to adapt what you do to be available for that new job. It's not just like, oh, it's going to create new jobs. It's going to destroy some jobs in the process, right? And so those are some of the things where I remind people that you must embrace AI, you must adapt and complement AI, but the reality of it is AI is a enabler to your future and not a destroyer of your future.
So I'd love to steal one word that you said in that as a jumping off point, because
Sure.
passion has to be one of the most common words that is used throughout this book.
Right.
And I was thinking in chapter 4, where you talk about gig work, side hustles, passion projects, it really made me stop to think, what are some of the underlying factors that are causing that trend that you mentioned, that 2 out of 3 people less than 35 years old will have a side hustle? Is it, in your experience, is it that they are running from the boredom of their job and they're finding their passion in these projects? Or is it so a push pull?
Sure.
What's
Yeah.
pushing them in that direction?
So,
Why aren't we finding our passion in our workplace, our primary workplace?
so I will tell you this. There's obviously there's no one answer because everybody is a composite of different needs and opportunities and situations. But what I will say is the following. There's this basic belief that they have this hedgehog concept in one of Jim Collins' books, I think, where he basically said, if you can find something that you're good at, find something that you're passionate about, and find something that someone will pay you for, that tends to be the ideal thing to do, right? So this combination of you love doing something, you're good at doing something, and someone will pay you. What has happened is now you can actually separate some of those things. That's what people don't realize, which is I basically call it that we have come to the most amazing, what I would say is the desegmentation and so up to now we always conflated two things. We conflated a job and work as being the same thing. I now believe that there'll be fewer and fewer jobs, but there'll always be lots of work. Because what will happen is more and more the world of work will turn out to be like the world of music. So if you think about it, in the old days, in the really, really old days, you had to basically go to where the musician and the musical instrument was to listen to music, right? So the days of Mozart, they had to go to a concert hall and the crowd was there, Mozart was there, the piano or whatever was there. Okay. Then, because of the phonograph record, you did not have to be where the musician was. But the phonograph record was heavy. I mean, the original phonographs. Then you have the Sony Walkman, and then now you could walk around and listen to music. Over time, what happened is even the instrument was not necessarily with GarageBand. You could actually create the sound of an instrument without an instrument. And then you no longer had the music even connected to a physical artifact like a CD or a vinyl record. It was in the cloud. And now what we basically do is we listen to music through the interface of playlists, which we curate based on our needs. So if you're running, you have one kind of playlist. So that's what's going to happen. Jobs are going to be basically a series of tasks, and the tasks are going to be done based on people's needs. So if that is true, right, what is basically happening is the reason people are doing this is they're now saying, I'm really passionate about art, but I can't be paid right now. Even if I'm really good at art, there isn't enough money in art. So, and by the way, this art thing doesn't give me insurance. So I need some dedicated income to pay the rent and to get insurance. But that's what I do to earn a living. But my real passion is art. But now I can do this art. But now I can actually monetize this art in a small way by selling my art on Etsy, okay? Or doing other kinds of stuff. So that's one reason. So what happens is now you have options to actually have your cake and eat it too. That's one reason. Second reason is I'm going to build my business here until it is good enough for me for it to supplement and really replace my income. I'm going to do the two simultaneously. The third, and this is the thing that most organizations and companies don't realize, and it's advice I give young people, I give even older people. I said, there's this famous line in a song. It's a name of a song actually by Carrie Underwood called Jesus Take the Wheel. And my basic belief when it comes down to your career, you need to take the wheel. Okay. You don't let your boss take the wheel. You don't let your HR people take the wheel. You're responsible for the wheel. You listen to your boss. They are a guidance thing. You listen to HR as a navigation part of your taking the wheel, but it's your wheel. And the reason is that people are doing this is because they realize that we're working in a world where they need options, right? So this maximizes their optionality. It has different income streams. It has different skill sets that they're growing. So they basically say, I now have more options. Like I always basically told people, they said, how come you build amazing people and make them famous? I said, the reason is the more famous they get and the more skills they have, they're more likely to stay with me than leave because they always have options. So when I behave like an idiot, they'll say it doesn't matter because I have options. I can kick this guy and leave. So I'll actually try to fix him and stay here. Does it make sense? So I always say maximize your optionality. Don't necessarily maximize your income initially.
So I don't know, Andy, if you're thinking the same thing. As I was listening to the first part of that, I kept waiting for Andy to bring out his guitar and start playing a little Bob Dylan or Guy Clark for us because music is his passion.
Right.
So
But now see what he
thank
can
you,
do,
Andy.
which he couldn't do in the past, is he can basically record his own music. He can stream it on Spotify, right? It's no longer him playing music, or if he was a singer singing in the shower. If he wants, he can now put it out. Now nobody besides Andy might listen to it, but he now is a published, right, guitarist, right? And that's the key thing, which is why one of the chapters in my book is marketplaces, like it's enabling marketplaces. And one of the things that you remember we asked what do senior people, I said, hey, in addition to sort of sort of learning and recognizing that we've entered debossification and all of that, a lot of senior people, besides the zone of control and learning and others, don't seem to understand that they no longer actually are even gatekeepers to anything. So often, for instance, someone will basically tell me, Rishad, we can introduce you and give you access to our client. So I obviously look at them and say, okay, who is this client? And they say it's so and so. So I said, uh, just to let you know, every Sunday, the CEO of this company reads me. I write a free Substack and I have 350 CEOs of companies. So I don't need permission. I'm already in contact with your client, right? I said, the days of gatekeepers are gone. Now, there are certain gatekeepers in toll booths. They're called Meta and Google, but that's a different world. But in this world, that world has gone. And so I keep, telling senior leaders, you're so full of it that you really think your flatulence smells like Chanel 5. It doesn't.
That's super interesting. I want to jump in here real quick.
Sure.
You're right about the music, and I think I love composing original stuff. No
Yeah.
one's going to listen to it but me. But one of the things was really helpful once I tried to retire the first time was I had some time to go back into mastery of music, understand circle of fifths, understand the core components. And the more I mastered the fundamentals, the more the tools gave me the flexibility to leverage those tools, like you said. And
Yeah.
one of the questions I have is, or a belief I have, is that your first 5 to 10 years, you really need to build some mastery.
Yes.
And then that also increases your optionality. But in the today's remote workforce, that apprenticeship is really key to get to mastery. You got to be apprenticed. And I'd love to get your thoughts on the leaders that have maybe just left college or they're entering out of college into the workforce in this hybrid space that I'm still getting used to. The apprenticeship, the community, the energy, the learning. I'm sure you get a million questions or the same question a million times on your thoughts about how do we do that in this hybrid world, because it feels different. I can't put my finger on it. Molly and I were talking about it, but it feels different. And it feels that we're missing something.
Yeah. So I'll tell you what I believe. So one of the key things is I believe that there are very significant benefits to in-person interaction. Um, and those significant benefits of in-person interaction, in many cases, are particularly true earlier in your career. But and I remind people, for somebody who can work from anywhere, be anywhere, we are now today when we're recording this, it's March 13th. right? Which is we're basically about 62 days into the year, and I have flown 24 times. Okay. Which basically says I believe in the importance of in person interaction. What I think a lot of people confuse is that in person interaction means the office. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it can't be done in the office, but if you get people to come into the office to do exactly what they're doing sitting at home, then you're basically not earning the commute. And what I
Yeah.
would basically say is in person interaction varies based on where you are. Earlier in your career, more in person interaction is better, right? In the middle part of your career, you probably need a little bit less because you've got some other issues like aging parents or kids or other kinds of things. Um, and so there's not a one size fits all model. But here's the key thing: how much in person interaction do you need? And maybe in this modern world, you can do it in a very strange way. Like, for instance, I'm going to, on this rethinking work, I'm going to launch like a YouTube channel. And one of my first guests is going to be a leading professor from Harvard who just finished a book showing how people learn. And he's now convinced that people can have learning and mentoring even virtually. Okay. Because what it is not you and I being physically together. It's you and I paying attention to each other and customizing to each other. So I could come to an office, Andy. I could be sitting in your office, and I could be there for 30 days and never see you, excepting
Yeah.
supposedly walk to this water cooler that never exists because we all are drinking from bottles. Okay. My whole stuff, everything we say that happens in an office never happens in an office. We don't do brainstorming in an office. When we build relationships, we go to bars and restaurants. When we go to learning, we go to events. So I believe in in-person interaction, but not necessarily the office as being the only place. It is a place. So what I would say to young people is ask and look and find. One of the big opportunities is get as many mentors as you can, and some of them may not be in your physical space, but some could be in other places. Some mentors may actually know you, that you actually have an interaction with them. That's important. And other mentors you just plug into by listening to them and watching them. uh, and then when you combine the two, you can learn a lot. But I do believe that, and I do believe one of the reasons why it's very important to connect with people is in order to be collaborative, communication, and convincing. You have to actually see real human beings. And here's what happens with real human beings: they're messy. They're terribly messy. I remember me saying everything is easy if we can just get rid of all the people, right? Which you can do in a virtual world by basically putting them on mute or swiping them away. In the real world, you can't do that. And in the reality of, you're sooner or later going to be a leader, and you're going to have to deal with these human life forms with their complications, which is why in-person interaction, to your point, is important. But how much do you need? When do you need it? Are the things that I'm not sure about. And I think it's a multivariate model versus one. But I think what people are trying, the reason people are feeling lost is because they're trying to figure out how to get people into an office versus how do you program in person interaction and teaching and learning and brainstorming.
I'd love to, and he's not going to like that I'm complimenting him on this, but one thing that is really telling about Andy is going to your word of mentoring. At
Yep.
this season of life that Andy is in, he is pulled in so many different directions. And yet I can call him and say, will you come talk to my students about store walks, about um, how do you remain curious your entire life? And he develops these models of sifting and slaying and shares them with them. And I can't get over that he's investing this time. So, Andy, thank you for, I don't know
Yeah.
how many semesters now you've mentored my students and me, well beyond the
Yeah.
classroom, having us out to your office space. But this is my question for you. You've described this environment that as a student I would long to be in. But how do my students go into a job interview and know the right questions to ask to figure out what environment they're stepping into? Do they have it? Has there been a debossification in the company that they're going to?
Yeah. So first of all, I'll just end with what you mentioned about Andy and mentoring, which he does extremely well. But here's the key thing that what happens. Okay, I believe spending 25 hours in person in the office is less valuable than spending an hour and a half being mentored by Andy. Okay. So my whole basic belief is, you know, I mean, there's so many people who will basically say, Molly, we spent an hour with you and it changed our lives. I could spend 30 hours in an office with a crowd of people and it won't change anything. Okay. So it has to be very, very practical and very straight about what we're trying to do. Now, moving to the question of how do we ask, right? So I've written a piece, which is one of the most popular pieces I've written on my Substack, called Career Lessons Revisited. And it's all the lessons I've learned. And the first 6 of the 12 lessons are for people coming out of school. Interestingly, the first 6. It's called the early career. So I said, first is recognize that whatever job you're going to get is likely to be sucky. So find the least sucky job you can get. Because if you don't talk about vision and mission and all of that, because the reality of it is the worst stuff in a company comes to the lowest level. So stop plotting that way. That's number one. Number two, to the very much point that you all have basically made, you need to build expertise in the first third of your career. And therefore, to build expertise, what you're looking for are what are trends that will continue. So you build expertise on something that's worthwhile versus building expertise in typewriter repair, right? So try to understand and align with future trends, as they say in Star Wars, may the force be with you. That's number two. Number three, what's very, very important more than anything else is to understand who you will be working for, right? Because the reality of it is, I built my career the last 25 years working for 2 or 3 incredible people. That was it. I said, yes, I was working at the Publicis Groupe, right? But I was working for Jack Clues, I was working for Maurice Levy, and I was working alongside people like Andy. So I said, that is more important than anything else. If that changes, I don't care about anything else. So what you're really doing is you're selecting people as much as a company. The only reason you're selecting a company is people may not know the people. So the company early on is like a good housekeeping seal, like it's a reputation mark, right? But really, what you're trying to do is, am I working in a place where I'm going to work with some good people? So you can say, who are my bosses? How do I get exposed? Ask about guidance and investment and training. That's another thing that's very important. And then after that, don't imagine anything else. Just say, I'm going to the school of hard knocks. I'm going to learn stuff, but I'm really select a job like very much you would select a university, which is, am I going to have good professors? Are they teaching subjects I'm particularly interested? And are they preparing me for the
So I'm thinking through the fact that the three of us have all managed many teams over the years. If we're living in this world of fractionalized work, how does a new entrant, somebody new in their career, stand out in the sea of same? I'm stealing that quote from a guest speaker that comes to my class, and it's made much more difficult when we are dealing in these environments where people are truly scattered. They may have more meaningful touch points, but they're different than what we've been teaching them to expect.
Yeah. So the way to think about it is, you eventually are going to differentiate yourself in a few ways, but the three most important ways are, one is what Andy mentioned, increasingly become good at what you do. Because when you become good at what you do, so what I basically say, the first thing is you hone a craft, hone a skill, become really good at what you do. And people reach out for people who are good at what they do, if you also do the second and third. The second is spend time building a great reputation. And a reputation is not just a brand, but a reputation is basically being known for 2 or 3 other things. So the expertise says I'm really good at doing something, but the other two are, you know, he's easy to work with, so collaborative, so I like working with them, and they're a person of integrity, so I can trust them and they won't like turn around and, right? So you begin to say, if you see people with integrity, you see people who have a reputation for, I mean, sorry, if you see people with expertise, a reputation for being collaborative and have integrity, and third is they're continuously learning and open to hunger to learn, you'll stand out. Here's why. People will come wanting to teach you. You'll go looking out for people to teach you. You'll keep honing your craft and people want to come there, and people say, Andy is not only really good at guitar, but Andy, right, is great to play along with. So we want him on our band, right? We want him in our act, which is important. And by the way, Andy is now learning different types. He was only rock and roll, but now he's decided, to be classical guitar. So he's playing, whatever, and, classical guitar. And so what happens is I like Andy because Andy is good. Andy is good in what he does, good to work with, and good over time. And that's what you do. Once you do that, everything else works out, right? But part of it is building reputation, reaching out to people, continuously learning. So saying, how do I learn? That is almost independent of where you are.
Yeah, I would love to get your thoughts, Rashad, on well said, on something that Molly does. Maybe you can ask her and reverse roles here a bit. But unlike any other marketing professor that I've worked with or known, she spends quite a bit of time at the very beginning of a semester on helping students define their personal purpose. And it's like, wow. I first thought that was strange. When are they going to learn the marketing skills and techniques and disciplines and data science and all the things you got to be a great marketer? But Molly, I'd love you to say why you do that, and Rishad, I'd love to hear you critique that as
Sure.
a good approach or not.
All right.
So the reason I do it, it was a project brought to me by 4 very talented executives. And these executives come into my class and walk the students through in small groups. So part of why I do it is my students listen to great speakers, but they don't interact with them. To the points you made earlier in the podcast, they don't have that conversation and collaboration, communication that they're practicing. But I also think we just live in a world where a student does their Enneagram and thinks that that means they understand themselves. And it's so surface. And they're launching into the biggest transition of their life. And I think they need to be more prepared. So it sets a tone for my class where we talk about very personal things in the first few weeks. And my students, I am obsessed with. I think I have the world's best job at exactly where I want to be. And part of it is that these students have fully bought in. And so I can ask anything of them in my remaining 16 weeks because we've gotten to know each other in that deep way and shared stories. It's like a down payment on what I'm going to ask of them the remainder of the semester.
And I think that's absolutely brilliant. And I'm going to go back to something I learned many years ago, like 43 years ago. So when I started my career, I joined a company called Leo Burnett. And Leo Burnett, the man, the advertising guy, he basically said there are 2 things that are important if you want to convince people anything. And those 2 are that you're relevant and you're likable. Okay. And what you basically end up when you do what you do is you're basically saying they come to like you because you're thinking about them, but everything is built around them initially. So they say, whatever I'm going to be taught is going to be relevant. And this teacher will tell me things that I'm upset about, but I like her. Okay. So now you can do all kinds of stuff. So I'll give you an idea. Often I will go into people and say things that they don't want to hear. Okay. But what they basically say is, both given your track record and how respectful you are when you tell us this, right? We think it's going to be okay. So think of yourself as Mary Poppins. That opening week is the spoonful of sugar that makes the medicine go down.
I like that. Oh, Molly Poppins, right here.
Right. That's exactly right. Molly Poppins.
Yes. Okay, so I've got a question that brings a
Sure.
couple of themes together that are throughout your book and our conversation, which is values, purpose, debossification, fractionalized workplace, all of this together, and your love for technology. My first thought when I read your book was, when do you sleep? And then my second thought after that was, if you are doing all of these things and you're pulled in so many different directions, how do you keep your purpose in front of you? What's your North Star at this season
Sure.
in life? And
Right.
how, in a 24-hour day, is it staying in front of you?
Perfect. So uh, I'll give you a couple of answers. So first is I actually have very much why I think what you do with your students early on is with this, what's your purpose? When I began my second career, and Andy knows this gentleman, I was reporting to somebody who was very skeptical about what I was doing or going to do. His name is Maurice Levy. And he said, "You've gone insane." And I said, "No, I've not gone insane." I said, "You're going to become executive chairman. I'm going to do my own thing." And one of the things is I explained what I was doing, but then over time I made it much better. So here's what I'm actually doing. What I do is my purpose is to help people see, think, and feel differently about how to grow themselves, their teams, or their business. Okay. So what I do is I'm going to help you grow either yourself, your team, or your business by making you see, think, and feel differently. So after you've either read me or interacted with me, you'll say, "I didn't think about that. I didn't think about that," right? Which is a key thing. And just one component. You are growing yourself. You've got lots of other people, but that's one. And then I say I do it in three ways: one to many, one to some, and one to one. So exactly what I'm doing, but I'm doing it in three ways: one to many, one to some, and one to one. One to many is a fancy way of basically saying I write books, I do podcasts, and I write a Substack, which is content. And I said, if you do that, hopefully I will give you accelerated insights. For any time you spend with anything, you'll get some insights fast. One to some is the fancy way of saying speaking. I do executive offsites, keynotes, you know, um, and sort of workshops. And that is hopefully leaving people with actionable inspiration, which is not in inspiring people, but what can I go do? And the last one is one to one, which is a fancy way of saying advisory, which is not consulting, which is real work, it's advisory. And I continue to advise my old place of work, which is Publicis, but also private equity and some startups. And there it's augmented intelligence. So it augment the intelligence you already have by bringing in additional intelligence. So it's a different form of AI: accelerated insights, actionable inspiration, augmented intelligence. I said, that's what I do. That's what I was doing the first 5 years. Then over time, I've now actually decided that my interface is slightly different. And my interface basically are three different things. One is future, how to future proof yourself in your company. The second one is work, how to think about where work is going and make sure you have good work, which is rethinking work. And the third area to me, which I believe we both have a crisis and opportunity, is leadership. So with somebody else, I've launched something, a program called Athena, which is about modern leadership. And so my belief, my current triangle is I focus on interrelated things, which is work, future proofing, and leadership. Obviously, there's interconnection. And anything that isn't those three and isn't my family, I say, why am I going to spend time doing it? If that makes sense. And that's very simple. And then the other thing I will tell your students is one thing that I do is I eat my own dog food. So the reason I get a lot of this stuff done, it's not me doing it by myself. Yes, I'm a one-person company, right? My podcast is produced by Publicis. I have an entire team that does that, right? When I wrote my book, I have an agent, I have a coach, I have an editor, I have a marketing team at HarperCollins, but that's what we have. And so the reality of it is I do some stuff, but I work with other people because it's very, very important because they're really good at doing their stuff. And we do stuff together. And the third is I continuously try to keep up to date so that even though I'm writing a book I wrote in a book about rethinking work, and on my website at rethinkingwork.io, people are interviewing me about my book, right? But I said, like, that's one way. That's pretty silly. So this YouTube thing I'm launching is basically I'm going to talk to world-class people about what they think about the future of work, right? Who says I've got the answer, right? Including, like, by the way, your book is stupid. Here's what we think the future of work is. And when you can do that, then people say, okay, the person's really good because he's now bringing in people who say he's silly.
I have to say, I feel like I've been stalking you ever since Andy first told me that I've had this opportunity. The What's Next podcast, just at its core of reaching out to people to see what's next in their environments it's brilliant. I've been on the road a lot. It is. I've been listening to it nonstop. Your interview with Seth Green was so
Yes, the 50-year
helpful.
career, absolutely. And one of the things that's very important and what people don't realize is, because I respect people's time, I talk to people for an hour, but then it's very tightly edited down to like 35, 40 minutes. My editor works at the BBC in the UK, right? My showrunner is in Costa Rica. So we have this entire team all over the place, which we put together. But as importantly, it's a two-way street. So the one only department, and this is what I tell people. I said, like, if you have this thing that you want to try to do something, don't give up hope. So the only department and division I never worked in my Publicis 37-year career was the creative department, right? I did media, digital, client service, strategy, staff, everything. And I could never get myself into the creative department because apparently I did not have a skill of that sort. Okay. But I said, I will figure out a way. So that's what I said. I'll write a Substack, I'll write a book, I'll do it. So now I could say that. Yesterday, and I'll talk, and so I'll give you a little bit about what's coming on next. So yesterday, so about 10 days ago, a gentleman you may or may not have heard of, Andy will have heard of, reached out to me and said, I have this show called The Business of Creativity. I would like you to come and talk to me about the business of creativity. And this gentleman, his name is Sir John Hegarty, and he founded BBH. He's like a legend in the world of creative, right? And I said, oh my God, now I arrived. I'm actually on this creative gurus thing talking about creativity. But immediately after we finished, because we engaged, I said, so Hagari, would you like to come to What Next? He said, I love it. So you're going to hear about the future of creativity from one of the most amazing legends, right? And that's what people basically say. And one of the things I will tell all your students, there are 2 or 3 lines I would like them to think about, right? One is because they hear a lot of people saying, masculine energy and hardcore and everything else. I'm just going to tell them soft is the new hard, okay? Which is respect, generosity, empathy, integrity. That's what you want to do. None of this hardcore bullshit. Okay. I mean, just sort of one of the things. But more importantly, the world's best strategy that you can ever have in a world that thinks that we're living in a world of scarcity is generosity. I believe generosity is the world's best strategy. You just give, you help people. It's wonderful what happens, right? And I said, often people, I said, there are obviously amazing people on TikTok. They're amazing people, but my whole stuff is, what are they trying to sell you? I said, be very careful when anyone's just trying to sell you stuff, right? I want people who come and give me stuff, not just sell me stuff.
I love that. As a matter of fact, I think, Molly, I would summarize your whole course about learning the practice of generosity as the core piece, but you do it in a subtle way through purpose, helping them discover their own purpose. That's a generous gift to students to walk out of college with a clarity of personal purpose and being able to also connect with industry leaders because you've been generous with your time and how you work with students. Now, Professor, the bell's about to ring, and so in class today. So I'd love for you to take a few minutes and just wrap us up with what are the biggest questions still you've yet to ask, Rishad?
Okay. So I'll say first, Rishad, I'm in the Walton College of Business and I study Sam Walton a lot. And one quote he says is steal and steal shamelessly. So I want to tell you, in addition to my typed notes, now my handwritten notes are copious. And your presence will be felt next semester. I've already realigned my topics. I've got great advice for my students, and I really have so much that I have to look forward to. So thank you for that. My last question comes from your podcast because your theme of that podcast is asking every thought leader what's next for them, what's next in their field. So I would love to wrap up by asking you what is next.
So, for me, as I said, the new thing I'm focusing on is this area of leadership. So this Athena project, which you'll hear more about. And hopefully I will get people like Andy and you involved, because there's a lot of things about, both academia but leadership. So for instance, Seth Green is part of the in this program, as are CEOs of companies, as are it's not for students, but it's more for people, I would say, in the demographic of 45 to 65 or 40 to 65. So the next is what is leadership. The other one, which I think is like is what next is, I always look forward, and I will leave you with this one thing, which is for your students and for listeners to, if you really want to be creative, you really want to be innovative, you really want to be alive, ask yourself if you can do this. Try to have one new experience every day. Okay. And sometimes it might be just walking to school in a different direction, doing something, because it's only when you fall out of your normal itinerary do you pay attention. Uh, and I do it to such an extent that 2 days ago I was in Atlanta for a talk. And I got there early for the talk, in part because it was the next day, but I came in a day. And I said, I must go and see some fish. So I spent 2 hours in the Georgia Aquarium, which is the world's biggest aquarium. The next day, it was going to be a very tight day. And I said, what's the one new thing I can do? And so I got up early in the morning and I basically decided I had never experienced the Waffle House. So I went to have breakfast at the Waffle House and paid attention to the Waffle House. And that's what I mean. It's not like, go to a Beyonce concert. Okay. There are lots of things that
Yes.
you can do, because when you do that, you pay attention, right? And it grows you. So I sort of leave you as that, as a gift. And the other is, if you ever want me to talk to either your students or other faculty, just let me know. I'm available.
Well, you'll regret saying that because Andy knows I will joyfully jump in.
Absolutely.
And I want you to
Absolutely.
know,
Because
Rashad,
I love students. I love professors, because that's what I first of all think I'm a perpetual student, and I also think I'm a teacher, but I don't have a PhD. So I said, or I'm not a part of the regular faculty at any school. But so I think this is the closest I get, is by jumping into people's classes and pretending.
well, I think you would outperform us and they wouldn't want to go back to me after
Great.
visiting with you and Andy. But you've given me so much to think about. And I've listened to plenty of interviews. I don't know how many interviews with you, going back to your first book.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate your willingness to pivot and talk about graduating seniors over and over. I greatly am
Absolutely.
appreciative, and Andy, to you too. And I can't wait to share this content.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rishad. It's been a great treat. I hope our editors cut none of this out because it's all gold, and I don't think they will, since the U of A is the editor. So I think they're going to want every minute of this conversation out there. It's been a great
Perfect.
treat. Love listening to you talk, and the world needs what you're saying today so much. The workplace is just so. I don't even know the right word, but it's in such transition that it needs transformation. And
Yep.
I
Yep.
think that if we can get more leaders' heads around that it's not just about return to office, it's return to intimacy, return to, connectivity. And I think you outline a good structure and a path for leaders to think about that. So really appreciate your time. You've really been an insightful guest today. And so thank you so much.